After the feast was over in Sabaudia, Italy, on Wednesday, on that Wednesday, we traveled north, Tina and I, to Florence in the region of Tuscany. And we rented a small apartment. I shared some of this with some of you in a very small town, about 45 minutes south of Florence. Our focus was between the two of us to just take in some of the rural culture of the area and spend about 4 full days just kind of marinating in what it would be like to live in a small town in the countryside of Italy. I thought today I would follow through on the promise that I made about this topic, and maybe it's a little bit of a sideline topic to the day, but I think it very much speaks to what we have gone through this past week, with the symbols that we've taken, and where we're headed as we leave these days. Now, our technical genius back there has told me that I have the power. Oh, did he already put that up? He already put it up. Look at you, Doug. Thank you very much. All right, since the Sabbath was our final full day in Italy before Tina and I are headed back to the States, we wanted to spend the day in the countryside and off the beaten path. And I made a reservation just off the cuff at a vineyard way up in the hills of Chianti, with the focus on a country drive and an afternoon reflection and appreciation. We were way too far from a gathering for services, and so I thought, let's just get out and get into the countryside together, and let's enjoy. And so I made a reservation at a vineyard for a tour, and I really, looking back, know that God directed us exactly there for the Sabbath. I didn't know that God was working on my behalf that day, on our behalf. We arrived at the vineyard about after kind of a very adventurous drive in the hills and valleys, mostly unpaved roads, as you can see there. Who knew that a tiny Fiat would feel like a very large car as we went, as the road would lead us through a few of 3 or 4 building small villages. You could literally, if your window is down, reach in someone's window on the way by and grab some food if they had it available. That's how tight some of those were. Structures were very, very close. When we arrived at the vineyard, I remember thinking this trip was kind of like life, a little bumpy, didn't really know where we were going at times, a little uncomfortable at times, twists and turns, tight conditions, left very little margin for error on this trip. And yet we reached our destination with about 2 minutes to spare, and I didn't think we would make it. But as Tina and I got out of the car, we looked just fine. The car looked like an absolute dust ball. And I later paid for that when I turned the car in. So, Francesco, one of the family members there, gave us and a small group of 8 others a lesson in family history that dated back too many generations to count. And this was an impassioned look behind the scenes of a long family-owned vineyard. And as we walked the grounds, what we really received that day was a sermon. I hope this morning to leave you with as many of the excellent analogies from the vineyard as I can. I could never hope to recreate what happened that day, a true gift from God to Tina and I on his Sabbath there in the hills of Tuscany. Yet my desire today is to share with you what we saw, what we heard, what was spoken to us, we believe, by God through other instruments. Francesco just exuded a passion, and that passion was simply something he was given that had existed for centuries. A fervent love of his family heritage and what his family had accomplished together, and what they were building, what they were still adding to and building together. If you and I can possess this same deep and motivating passion or love for what God is collectively doing in us, we would be so much further down the road than we are. It was just a real example of what God is trying to stir in us as his people. Let's turn to Psalm 19. Doug, you can probably remove that if you want. I want to begin in Psalm 19 as a backdrop to this kind of profound sermon Tina and I received that Sabbath afternoon. All of us here today believe in who God is. He's the designer, he's the creator, he's the sustainer of all things. All things exist and have the power to exist because of him. Nothing exists outside the authority of God, and the mind of God and his intent are really on display. If we just shift our perspective, if we train our minds to see things from his perspective. Again, Psalm 19 and verse 1, it says, "The heavens declare the glory of God. The sky displays his handiwork. Day after day it speaks out. Night after night it reveals his greatness. There is no actual speech or word, nor is its voice literally heard. Yet its voice echoes throughout the earth. Its words carry to the distant horizon." King David expresses in such a vivid way that we can realize the greatness of God by his creation. He says that while his creation sits silent before us, it speaks powerfully, glorifying its creator. That takes intention on our part to look and to listen and to see. If something sits silent, it's often that it goes unnoticed, and if recognized, often forgotten due to its silence. David speaks to a truism in the physical world. I've read many times over the years Romans chapter 1, verse 20, so I won't ask you to turn there. I'll just read it. "For since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes, God's invisible attributes, his eternal power, his divine nature, have been clearly seen." They have been seen and witnessed because they are understood through what has been made, so people are without excuse. So Paul states, again, humanity is without excuse in recognizing there is a God, because he has revealed himself in the details of what he's done. We, above all the people on the earth, ought to be able to clearly see God in his creation. We're trained to look and to see him. I don't know if this will work for me. Do you want me to do it, Doug? You want to do it? Slide 2. I'll probably mess it up. So, as a group, we walked out on top of the building that overlooked the downhill side of the vineyard. It was explained that this region of Tuscany was Chianti, but that this smaller area of Chianti was Chianti Classico, governed, if you will, by a very tight set of laws to ensure that these grapes and the wine that they made was created naturally and pure. No pesticides, no additives, no fertilizers, everything produced only by organic means. Great lengths are purposefully taken to protect the area from outside influence. These laws that Francesco shared with us briefly were spoken of with reverence and ownership by him. They were not seen as restrictions on the families who owned the land there and produced the wine in that region. They were to protect the land. They were to protect the purity of the process and protect the family's devotion to the right way of producing wine. More than once, Francesco made a point made these points about the laws that exist with a real satisfaction that if someone did break the laws, they would be arrested, jailed, and never again be allowed to work in or around the vineyards in that area, even to the point where they would not allow anything non-organic to be brought in or to pass through there on the roads. They had to go around. Very strict. Slide 3. Let's turn to Isaiah chapter 5. God is a supreme being, is the supreme being in all of existence, and when we stop to visit, if you will, the intricacies of what he has created and accomplished, it should connect us to him. It's designed by him to connect us to him, to see him, to realize his power. Isaiah 5 is the first full prophetic vineyard parable aimed at covenant accountability. In context, God is telling Judah and Jerusalem that he gave them every advantage he could give them, yet they produced the opposite of what he planted for what he planted for them. Isaiah 5 gives us a glimpse really into the joy and love with which our Father applied to his work in what he calls his vineyard. In verse 1 of Isaiah 5, it says, Now let me sing to my well-beloved a song of my beloved regarding his vineyard. My well-beloved has a vineyard on a very fruitful hill. So God's love for us and his creation did not begin when, again, we responded to him, right? It began with him before the world was framed. And we heard this earlier in the week. Verse 2, he dug it up and he cleared out its stones and planted it with the choicest vine. He built a tower in its midst, and he also made a winepress in it. So he expected it to bring forth good grapes, but it brought forth wild grapes. So the vineyard sits on an appointed hill by God. He has purposed to plant each of us in a place where he can maximize our growth, a place conducive for growth, a place he can then provide what is needed to grow. And in verse 2, he personally tends to that hill, clearing away the stones and personally preparing just the right soil. He then plants the choicest vine. And commentaries on this word, this phrase here, reveal the best planting material for a select type of grape for an intended outcome. Kind of see that there is a lot of thought, a lot of forethought going into this. This is linked to Jeremiah 2:21, where it says, a noble vine from a right seed, which would yield purple grapes of the richest variety. He then built a tower, right? He tells us he built a tower so he could actively watch over the vines. And this speaks to the preeminency of God's investment in this covenant with Judah and Jerusalem. And we know God also established the priesthood and raised up prophets to support this structure of safety and direction, oversight for the health of the vineyard of God. The tower tells us the vine dresser did not just plant the vine and walk away. He stayed close enough to watch it, protect it, to oversee its development. He constructed a wine press with the intention of and the expectation of a harvest of fruit. The fruit collectively was meant to be pressed until it became something singular, something more than its original form. Does this speak to us? Does this speak to us? God has done all of this with the end in mind, and that is why his care is so deliberate in our present time today. God says, I did all of this to produce good grapes, yet it brought forth wild grapes. Doug, you could take that down if you like. Wild grapes here are offensive to the owner, the opposite of what a carefully tended vineyard would produce. The term wild grapes does not mainly mean untamed grapes. We would tend to think that if we hear the term wild grapes. It doesn't mean untamed grapes. It carries the idea of something foul, stinking, rotten, worthless fruit. That's what that means. So the contrast isn't good grapes versus lesser grapes. It is closer to good fruit versus spoiled, offensive fruit to God. So God invested everything, and what came back was not simply weak fruit. It was fruit that contradicted the whole purpose of the vineyard. Now this sets up verse 7. In Isaiah 5, verse 7, for the vineyard of the Lord of hosts is the house of Israel, and the men of Judah are his pleasant plant. He looked for justice, so he looked for proper judgment in his people, but behold oppression or bloodshed. For righteousness, but behold a cry for help, a cry of distress. They had reached a place by their decision making where they were in distress. In spite of God's labor to produce good fruit, his people returned to him wild grapes, unusable fruit. The covenant life produced the opposite of what God planted it for. And the balance of Isaiah 5, if we read through it, lists the woes that come from choosing that direction. God then in verse 3 and 4 calls them to render a verdict, to judge themselves against his indictment. In verse 3, it says, now, O inhabitants of Jerusalem and men of Judah, judge, please. He's pleading. God is pleading with them. Judge, please, between me and my vineyard. What more could I have done to my vineyard that I have not done in it? Why then, when I expected it to bring forth good grapes, did it bring forth wild grapes? So he calls Jerusalem and Judah to judge fairly, to examine what God had done and what he had done in his vineyard. And then he asks a question that exposes really the heart of the problem. God had done everything a loving owner could do, so the failure was not in his care, but in their response. He was calling them to repentance in a very active way. This is very much a spring holy day theme, especially at this point in the Passover season. Under the old covenant, God's chosen people, his choicest vines did not produce what he planted them to produce, and God then calls for an honest assessment as to why. And those of us who have accepted Jesus Christ as our Savior and entered into the new covenant, understanding that this season is not only about our reflection, looking back and judging ourselves against the perfection of God. It's also about God investing everything, investing his Son so that through his Spirit he might produce what he has always intended to produce in the vineyard. Having come through the Passover and now standing at the end of the days of unleavened bread, we can hear what God is declaring here with sharp clarity. He knows what he has invested. He knows those whom he's invested in. And we, in turn, can be confident in Jesus Christ and the work that they want to do in us. So we know God is not looking for fruit. He is looking for fruit, for any fruit. He's looking for fruit that is sound, clean, and true. God is committed to removing what would spoil the harvest in which he is so deeply invested. Days of unleavened bread fit Isaiah 5 and the vineyard example because this is the season when we recommit to consciously cooperate with the vine dresser's work in our lives. So God's vineyard produces sound fruit and not wild grapes. Slide 4. These are pictures. Most of them are pictures that we were able to take. This one not. I didn't take a drone with me. As we walked around the vineyard, the details that were shared kept speaking to us spiritually about God's vineyard and our role in it. And I want to share a few of these lessons because they were deeply impactful to Tina and I believe should be very impactful to us during the last day of unleavened bread as we kind of look at the first part of God's holy day schedule as it's leaving in the rearview mirror. The first word, viticulture. Viticulture. It means it's the cultivation, the planting, the training of the vines, the pruning, the protecting, the harvesting. It is all-encompassing. Francesco shared the families in the Chianti Classical region care most about doing things right from beginning to end. And we know when he says we know when we do this, the quality of the fruit will always be the best we can produce. He stated quality is our expression of who we are. Quality is our expression of who we are. Our expression to others is who our family is. This is our culture. Our viticulture is everything we are, everything we do, including how we express ourselves. In order to understand anything, he said, in order to understand anything I say on this tour, this must be your perspective. The first thing he said you must keep in mind is if you want a high-quality culture, you have to suffer the vines. You have to suffer the vines. He continued, we must create a situation where the vine is in a constant state of challenge for the grape to be of excellent taste. He talked about the type of soil. You can see on the slide there, not a gentle, easy soil. The best soil, he said, is a dry and rocky, small stone material. He had us pick some of that up with our hands. High-quality grapes come from a soil that will always be thirsty because the water does not accumulate. It runs off. You see it's on a hill. One of the reasons vines must be planted on a steep hillside. Flat ground and wet soil trap contaminants and encourages rotting. And he stated it might produce very large, plump grapes, but they would be watery and diluted, and their taste would not be good. Sun exposure. As you see on that slide as well, the vines on the hillside, it will receive direct sun for more hours of the day. The sun keeps them warm all day, and because of the rocky soil that they're purposefully planted in, they will stay warmer throughout the night. And the more sunlight a grape gets, the thinner the skin, and the more sun can positively affect what is going on inside the grape. It welcomes the sunlight into itself. And he said, nature does its work for you. A comfortable vine makes weak wine. A comfortable vine makes weak wine. A struggling vine produces something rich. He said that with quite a twinkle in his eye. I wonder if we would say the same thing with the same twinkle in our eye, in our relationship with God. We've covered where to plant, why it should be planted there, and what it should be exposed to. But what about the vine dressing? What about the vine dressing? The next slide. Francesco explained that pruning begins early. In January, while the vines are sleeping, are in that dormant state, while they're quiet on the surface, but internally, he explained, they're recharging energy. That timing of pruning is important, and the vine dresser does not wait until the plant is full of visible activity. He acts in the still season. He begins before the fruit is seen. He begins with intention. Those who can't see the slide, I'll try to explain it along the way. I realize sometimes when you put that many things on a slide, it's a little challenging. First, this slide on the left displays a vine newly planted, newly put in the ground in spring. And it's allowed to grow as it will through the summer, and it shoots up, and likely a number of branches will shoot up. And in the first winter pruning, it's cut way down. You see that third picture from the left there at the top. Francesco said that in the winter pruning, they cut away 70 to 75% of the old wood. Now, that's not a light trimming. That is a major reduction. It is deliberate, severe, and necessary. He continued, the purpose is not to injure the vine, but to direct its strength into what will matter for the coming season. Left alone, the vine would spread itself too far. It would waste its energy on branches that don't produce, or on too many branches that will diminish the whole vine's effectiveness. He continued, without pruning, the trunk and the roots would not be able to support the weight of the growth or any fruit that may come, and the vine could destroy itself, could fall over and break. So the vine dresser cuts deeply in order to force it to concentrate, to encourage life, to strengthen it, and to bring about quality. You can take that down, Doug, if you like, for the moment. Let's turn to Romans chapter 5. Romans 5. When I heard this, it immediately spoke to me spiritually, as I'm sure it did to you, because God also allows pressure, cutting back, and difficulty in our lives for His purpose, for His will. Romans 5, beginning in verse 1, it says, "Therefore, having been justified by faith, we have peace with God through our Lord Jesus Christ, through whom also we have access by faith into this grace in which we stand, and rejoice in hope of God's glory. And not only that, but we also glory in tribulations." So if we're grounded in Christ, if as we've walked through Passover and entered and have lived inside of the days of unleavened bread and what they picture, if we have a firm grasp on who Jesus Christ is and what he has done for us, then not only that, but we also glory in tribulations, knowing that the tribulations produce perseverance, and perseverance character, and character hope. Paul's describing the same principle in spiritual terms. The rest of Romans 5 speaks to the grace afforded to those whom God has called and brought into a covenant relationship with him. So Christ died and has risen so that we might enter into life, a life that God is cultivating in us. So in God's viticulture, if you will, tribulation is not meaningless. It produces something. It develops perseverance. It shapes character. It leads to hope being fulfilled. The vine dresser knows that without that process, the fruit would never become what it is meant to be. This was covered earlier. In James 1, verses 2 through 4, James reinforces this same principle. And I'm going to read it again because reading it twice seems to be what God wanted done today. How are we to respond to what God is doing? In James 1 and verse 2, it says, "My brethren, count it all joy when you fall into various trials, knowing that the testing of your faith produces patience." When you read that, your mind kind of gets into one of these Chinese finger puzzles. Wait a minute, you're testing me, and it's supposed to produce patience. But oftentimes when we're tested, our patience leaves pretty quickly, doesn't it? Mine does, especially on the road in traffic. But let patience have its perfect work, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking nothing. In other words, brought to maturity, perfected through the process, made complete, lacking nothing God intends to produce in you. Again, back to the slide 5 there. Year two's summer shows much more growth, doesn't it? So after that first winter pruning, the spring brings much growth. But without the proper training wires, the vine is still very much in peril. Francesco explained that pruning is governed by foresight. The vine dresser looks at the buds in January and already begins calculating the coming harvest. One bud leads to one shoot, and one shoot can produce only a limited number of grape clusters. The plant can only handle so much. Let's turn to Hebrews chapter 12. Hebrews chapter 12. This all sounds very much like the way God speaks of his work in us. What the vine dresser does to the vine is not pleasant to the vine in the moment, but it is aimed at producing the best result. So let's notice how Scripture describes this process, not in agricultural terms, but in our lives. Hebrews chapter 12, beginning in verse 3, "For consider him who endured such hostility from sinners against himself, lest you become weary and discouraged in your souls. You have not yet resisted to bloodshed, striving against sin." So we're reminded that, especially this time of year, that Jesus Christ carried the greatest weight of all of this on our behalf. And Paul encourages us with a spiritual perspective to humble ourselves before God and not grow weary in his hands, having a proper perspective in the hands of God. In the New English translation, continuing in verse 5, "And have you forgotten the exhortation addressed to you as sons? My son, do not scorn the Lord's discipline or give up when he corrects you, for the Lord disciplines the one he loves and chastens every son he accepts." Verse 7, "Endure your suffering as a discipline." God is treating you as sons. For what son is there that a father does not discipline? But if you do not experience discipline, something all sons have shared in, then you are illegitimate and are not sons. And some of you may be saying to yourself, well, I'm definitely not illegitimate because I have suffered, right? Besides, we have experienced discipline from our earthly fathers, and we respected them. Shall we not submit ourselves all the more to the Father of spirits and receive life? For they, human fathers, disciplined us for a little while, as seemed good to them, but he does so for our benefit, that we may share his holiness. Now all discipline seems painful at the time, not joyful, but later it produces the fruit of peace and righteousness for those trained by it. In the physical vineyard, the question becomes how much pruning is needed to get the quality that is desired. That's the heart of the matter. The Chianti viticulture is not about maximum output. It's about right fruit at the right quality for the right purpose. Let's turn to John 15. John 15. What this simple graphic on slide 5 didn't show is what he explains further. Francesco says there's a second annual pruning. What was begun in the winter is revisited in the spring. Anything unnecessary is removed again from the vine. Anything that divides strength is cut away again. So pruning is not a single moment just in the winter. It is kind of an ongoing, attentive work. The vine is shaped over time, watched carefully, and brought step by step toward harvest. So at this point, standing in the vineyard, it becomes impossible to not hear the words of Jesus Christ more clearly. John chapter 15, verse 1, and we have heard this many times over the last week, "I am the true vine, and my Father is the vine dresser. Every branch in me that does not bear fruit, he takes away, and every branch that bears fruit, he prunes, that it may bear more fruit." So back to that slide. In the graphic on this slide, we see a 3-year progression of growth. From the time the first vine is planted in the ground to when it becomes trainable all the way to the right. By year 2, the main trunk has been identified. You see that just year 2 on the right there at the top. The main trunk has been identified by the vine dresser and the graphic. Everything else is trimmed away. You see it's just standing there by itself. And the 3rd year, it produces more growth. Now on the left on the bottom, it produces more growth and more fruit. And the graphic ends with what that winter pruning looks like again. So the 3rd year of pruning. and everything else is cut away. Each year, the trunk and the branches will thicken, the roots will continue to grow, but the number of branches will remain the same on a mature vine, because the vine dresser has determined the exact right balance for each vine to produce the best quality fruit for that plant. Pruning is not God demanding more activity from us. It is the Father removing what is in the way, so Christ's life produces the kind of fruit he is looking for in us. Francesco continued, this region's culture is quality over quantity. So we will pinch or prune away any part of the vine that will reduce the quality of the fruit produced. So in the right-hand corner at the bottom there, what you probably can't see is that there are wires that are holding up those branches so that they can concentrate on producing fruit. The next slide. I've attempted this morning to pass along a vivid sermon that Tina and I were unexpectedly given on a very beautiful Sabbath afternoon, as you see in the hills of Chianti. One of the family members who, through viticulture, sees and understands the handiwork of a creator, gave us an excellent case study on what God is busy doing in each of us. Viticulture is the careful cultivation of the vine, from planting to pruning to producing fruit and harvesting. The days of unleavened bread are both a physical and a spiritual reminder of that pruning process that must take place in our lives continually so that we produce spiritual fruit, a fruit that God intends to last forever. This time of year should bring to our minds that the viticulture God has engaged us in as we enter another year is very active and will continue to be active as we enter each year in our minds, re-enter into that covenant with him and humble ourselves before the vine dresser. Tina and I made our way through the hills in our little Fiat back to our little town and our little apartment, which we very much enjoyed. And when we begin today in Psalm 19 and in Romans 1:20 with the reminder that God reveals himself through his creation, he is seen again in the details of what he has made. If we are willing to look, to examine, and to engage in the relationship he is calling us to, we will see him. He will be a part of everything we do. Passover and the days of unleavened bread are designed by God. They're designed to cause us to examine, to be pruned by him so that we can be free of the things we don't need and spend our year ahead on growth, concentrating on producing good fruit, godly fruit. In the next slide, as we walked up the narrow street to the town square that evening after our visit to the vineyard, there was really one more important lesson still kind of waiting for us. God wasn't done that day. Stopping at a wine shop, we bought a bottle of wine to share at dinner. And then something struck me. How easy is it to purchase and drink a bottle of wine and never consider the viticulture behind it? the process that teaches us about the glory of God. How easy is it in our consumer-based society to miss seeing and appreciating the glory of God in the details of his handiwork? Coming out of these days and entering into another year, I pray our perspective is not casual. That the Passover and the days of unleavened bread, and frankly all of God's holy days, are not just something we take off the shelf, enjoy for a moment, and then move on. I hope that they leave something with us, something in us, that they sharpen our awareness and keep us mindful. There is no time for us to be casual about our calling. In the vineyard of our God, the Father and his Son are anticipating a quality harvest in each of you.